This preaching series, Revisiting Children's Bible Stories as Radical Disciples, encourages us to reflect on and challenge what we've heard about stories in Sunday school. Now, I have to make a confession. I've never been to Sunday school. We would go to church growing up, but somehow my mum had gotten this weird idea that Sunday schools in the 90s tended to teach some rather weird interpretations of classic Bible stories that I'd probably end up having to deconstruct later in life. So I wasn't allowed to go and had to sit in church, so I never actually heard about Esther in Sunday school. But where Esther did come up was youth group. Not in youth group talk, but my memories are of kids at youth group, especially girls, talking about how much they loved Esther and how cool they thought she was. And what made her cool in their eyes? The fact that she spent a whole year getting beauty and makeup treatments done. Now, I'm not sure if it's because the idea of spending more than 4 minutes doing my own makeup in the morning seems like wasted time I could have spent sleeping, but this glorification of getting beauty treatments as the coolest thing a woman does in the Bible sort of put me off Esther altogether. And then I did that thing that is so easy to do, take a person or a character we don't think we have much in common with, and reduce them down to a simplified caricature of a woman who just spent all her time putting on perfume and oils and prancing around in some kind of ancient spa. And once you've reduced someone to that, it made it pretty easy for me to put Esther to one side and not really have thought about her seriously since I was 13 years old. But now I find myself, decades later, lined up to preach a sermon on her. And with a group of critical thinkers like this congregation, a reflection of the way teenagers talked about how cool beauty treatments were kind of gave me a bad vibe. Doesn't really seem like the sort of good news that's going to cut it. So it looks like despite skipping Sunday school, I've still ended up with some deconstructing to do. I may be biased, but I think one of the best ways we can together start to rethink assumptions and hang-ups we might have about a narrative is to look at some great art. So today let's look at Marc Chagall, a Jewish artist born in what is now Belarus, but in 1887 was a settlement of the Russian Empire where Jews were allowed to reside. Here's how Chagall shows us Esther and her guardian, Mordecai. An elongated, curved frame, alluding to traditional feminine beauty, a glow around her, a sense of softness and tenderness, both in the character of Esther and maybe in the way Chagall portrays her conversing with Mordecai, a partnership of sorts, maybe discussing her position and future. As a Jewish artist who took inspiration from his faith and was later commissioned to illustrate the Old Testament, we are in fact able to look to Chagall for visual representations beyond the story of Esther. In his series Drawings for the Bible, Chagall also represents the chapter before the reading we heard today, and it's a rather different scene. So what is going on here? It doesn't look like the same vibe of beautiful Esther who wins favour from the king. I think in order to better engage with the story of Esther we heard today, it's helpful to understand what happens beforehand in the lead up to this story. Before Esther arrives on the scene, we first hear the story of King Ahasuerus and his wife Vashti. And you can probably tell from this artwork, it doesn't end very well for Vashti. I'll give you a sense of what happened. Now, this might be hard to imagine in the very removed context we live in today. But the king was a man in a position of political power who was really into showing off his wealth. He liked showing off the glamour of his palace, he liked showing off how much he could drink, and he liked showing off his wife. So after the king had gathered all the visiting powers for a massive, opulent feast and eaten and drunk with them for days, we are told that then Queen Vashti was called before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the people and officials her beauty. To show her beauty to a bunch of drunk, powerful, rich men. Before I tell you what Queen Vashti does next, it's worth pointing out that the Queen was also participating in this whole political diplomacy exercise. She'd been throwing her own extravagant feast for all the important women, so she's not really a passive bystander. And one would assume, to be married to a powerful man like King Ahasuerus, who demands glorification and obedience and power, she must have somehow conducted herself in a way that fitted the mould and system up to this point. All this to say, I wouldn't think she was unaware of the system she was participating in. But when it comes to the demand to show off her beauty to the foreign dignitaries, she says no. And it won't surprise you to know, a woman saying no to a man like the king, he doesn't handle it well. In fact, he completely freaks out. What if other women also start saying no to men? There will be no end of contempt. We are told the king's advisors start to worry that other women will follow Vashti's example and rebel. Now again, a concept that may be hard to imagine in our modern context, but this powerful ruler's response to feeling threatened by a marginalised social group is to sign an executive order defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. I'm sorry, that was a different guy. The king signs a royal order that all women will give honour to their husbands. You can see I got the two confused, similar aim, I'd say. The king's royal order also decrees to have Vashti replaced with someone better than she. So you might be able to make sense now of the shame and banishment Chagall presents in this visual representation. Vashti cowered over at the bottom of the staircase as the king towers over her, forming an impenetrable wall with his advisors. A man who has used his power to cast out anyone who dare challenge his authority. And coincidentally, wearing a big red hat. Anyway. Captured in this story is an approach of defiance, a woman disobeying and threatening rebellion against a powerful system she's also participated in. I wonder, as we then come to Esther's story, which follows, if Esther knew her predecessor's backstory before Mordecai put her up for the gig of marrying the king. Either way, looking at the story of Vashti as context for Esther makes it easy for us to envisage the type of women King Ahasuerus was looking to recruit for his new, improved, trad wife. As he decrees, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Gross. And out of all the women he rounds up, he finds Esther. The reading tells us she was fair and beautiful, which I'm sure attracted the king. But a lot of these women must have been good looking. I wonder what else the king knew about Esther. I wonder, did he know she didn't really have much of a support circle? No father or mother, no fancy connections. Surely a woman like that wouldn't dare to defy him. I wonder if her family background, knowing her ancestors had been carried away, captives of another powerful king, made her more inclined to fear authority and be obedient. Surely a woman like that wouldn't dare to humiliate him like Vashti had. There is one thing the king definitely knew about Esther, apart from her beauty. That is, that when it was her turn to approach the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, had advised her to. I wonder if this was really what won King Ahasuerus over, what he's been looking for since Vashti embarrassed him so. A woman who just did what she was told. So is that who Esther is? The antipode of Vashti. Where Vashti is well connected, Esther is vulnerable and submissive. Where Vashti was defiant, Esther does as she is commanded. Where Vashti threatened an uprising and rebellion against husbands, Esther will bring women to universally honour them. I think if we were to leave our character interpretation of Esther at that, we're in danger of doing exactly what the king's plan and the corresponding patriarchal powers of our day would like us to do. simplifying and pitting these women against each other. It's no secret that a consequence of living in patriarchy is it lures us into a mindset where there is a right and wrong way for women to do things. For example, someone with a more conservative view of the role of women might point to Vashti as being wrong in not obeying her husband, and Esther as being right in her submissive approach. As a more progressive thinker, it's easy for me to dismiss this interpretation of assumed correct feminine roles, but I don't think taking a progressive view makes us immune from being tempted to still pass judgment on these women. For example, I'm tempted to say Vashti, who stands up for herself, speaks truth to power, risks her own position, leans in, if you like, goes about standing up to the systems of power in the right way with assertiveness and confidence, and to say that Esther, only asking for what she is told to, complying with the system, participating in this virgin beauty contest, is going about it in the wrong way, seemingly not challenging the system at all. And the Bible seems to give us a bunch of opportunities to sort women into the ones taking the right approach and the ones taking the wrong approach. Mary and Martha, Mary Magdalene and Mary Mother of Jesus, Sarah and Hagar, Ruth and Orpah. You could blame the text for always positioning female characters in this dualistic way, but I'm not sure I can completely when we don't seem to do the same thing with the pairs of men we're presented with. Elijah and Elisha, Jesus and John the Baptist. Imagine if we started doing this weird right and wrong comparison thing in the way we speak about Moses and Aaron. Moses should have really spoken up for himself more, and that Aaron always stealing the spotlight in front of Pharaoh. This tendency for comparison and judgment of women into right and wrong approaches is not new. And impossible and contradictory standards reinforced by patriarchy means women and non-binary people will never be able to take an approach deemed perfect by society. So what does this do for us when we come back to Vashti and Esther? If we look at it through the lens of two women both navigating a male-dominated society, are their approaches to power and authority just products of their environment? Women who likely would have had limited autonomy or lack alternative social roles to step into? So in this story, they're just either shunned or congratulated by powerful men depending on how those situations they find themselves in serve the king. It might be less judgmental than comparing them, but even if it's a fair assessment of their position in society, I'm not sure that lens gets us any closer to learning anything from these women either. So if Vashti and Esther aren't for us to judge as examples against each other, and they aren't just powerless pawns of patriarchy, how should we look at them? Esther is one of the two books of the Bible that doesn't mention God. So unfortunately, we never get to hear what God thinks about this whole virgin beauty contest situation. I reckon she would have had opinions. But seeing as it's a sermon, I think we can look to God, or rather God's Son, when it comes to looking for an example of how to approach the way we look at women, both those in the Bible and those in our lives. Dorothy Lee Sayers, English crime novelist, playwright, and theologian, writes in her essay series, Are Women Human? Perhaps it is no wonder that the women were first at the cradle and last at the cross. They had never known a man like this man. There never has been such another, a prophet and teacher who never nagged them, never flattered or coaxed or patronised, who never made ark jokes about them, never treated them as either the women, God help us, or the ladies, God bless them, who rebuked without querulousness and praised without condescension, who took their questions and arguments seriously, who never mapped out their sphere for them, never urged them to be feminine, nor jeered at them for being female, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious. There is no act, no sermon, no parable in the whole of the gospel that borrows its pungency from female perversity. nobody could possibly guess from the words and deeds of Jesus that there was anything funny about a woman's nature. So, using Jesus as our guide, I think we have an opportunity to reframe both Vashti and Esther, not as opposed to one another, but maybe taking opposite yet valid approaches in a challenging system. Instead of framing their approaches as defiance versus obedience, reactive terms which centre the authority they are under rather than the women themselves, I suggest we re-centre these women in the story and look at them as confrontational versus strategic. Vashti takes the confrontational approach. She's opportunistic. She sees the right moment appear when her audience has all eyes on her, the moment she can speak out against an immoral power with the most impact. She knows what she's doing. After all, she's been queen, knows how the king operates. She knows exactly how to embarrass him and what will force him to expose his frantic, angry nature. She also knows the women around her, how to rally them together for the start of a rebellion, what will resonate and get them on her side. And I think she knows the risk. Probably knows she won't topple the king with one act of uprising, knows she'll be banished or replaced, or worse, but her act of confrontation seems unconcerned with personal consequences and laser-focused on calling out an injustice she can no longer accept or be compliant in. And Esther takes the strategic approach. She knows she's got no standing or power in the society she finds herself in. She knows that a guy rounding up a bunch of women for his wife is messed up, but for her, it also offers a way forward, a way to reach a position of influence within the system she wants control over. She can read a room, figure out how to win others over, is quick to deduce where to speak and where to stay quiet to her own advantage. She knows what to say and what not to say about her own heritage, her own ambitions, her own connections. She knows a year of beauty treatments is completely over the top, but she's got the bigger picture in sight, the end game, the final goal. And she knows when the time is right, she'll be able to use her influence over the king to do the right thing with her power. Far out. I like both these women. And maybe that being able to look at both these women's approaches as valid and admirable is what helps us to get to our good news today. I know I was joking about the parallels earlier, but it's pretty easy to see our own kings when you look around today. Not so much individuals necessarily, but systems of power that seem impenetrable or so ingrained we don't know where to start with rallying against them. Gender inequality, ingrained in financial inequity, racism, genocide. And I think in our justified overwhelm, we risk believing what we started out today believing about the story of Esther and Vashti, that there's a right and wrong way to challenge these systems and that it's our job to figure out the best and perfect approach that's going to be able to finally eliminate the system completely. And that thought can take us to a place that starts to feel very all or nothing. We're either seeing empire come crashing down or cursing ourselves that we haven't done enough. We're either only willing to partake in perfect systems, which in reality may not exist, or we end up going around in circles trying to figure out how to get anything done without being complicit in imperfect systems. I think the good news we find here today is that picking your moments and being in touch with the approach that works best for you at any given point in time, whether that be confrontational or strategic or a bit of both, is a valid and effective approach to challenging or even improving the parts of these systems you find yourself with an opportunity to impact. And I see that when I look around at this congregation. I see us being confrontational in the ways we protest and march and post about injustices. And I see us being strategic in the way so many of us spend our day jobs working within not always perfect systems to make them better, or the emerging generations work we do here. It's this diversity of approach done within community that I think can pull us away from that all or nothing mindset and into a space where, like the women we've heard about today, we can find those right moments to act and have faith that how we act in those moments might have more impact than we comprehend.